Hello everyone, welcome back for week 5, where we're going to take a look at some different instructional strategies for both training and consulting. Now, as for our learning objective, we're still in the design phase of that ADDIE model. And at the end of this design phase, we want to be able to construct a storyboard. That'll be our project next week. And this week, we're really going to focus on identifying potential instructional strategies. Now, before we get into this week's content, I just wanted to give a little feedback on Knowledge Check 3. I thought it was a fun activity for you guys. Hopefully you enjoyed it and you found some value in it. My biggest takeaway is that AI is pretty good at writing objectives. Okay, may not be perfect by any means yet, or they may not be as good as the objectives you wrote, but they can write effective objectives in a lot of ways. Okay, so we do have this new AI tool that we can use to write objectives moving forward. Okay, just another tool in your toolbox. However, I think the big thing to keep in mind is that we still need the human element. Okay, we still need instructional designers to make sure our objective matches our stakeholder and content needs. Okay, so this is still, in my opinion, where you're going to make your big bucks. You have to be able to know whether our objective is what our stakeholders need, our learners, our managers, okay, anyone in that training process. We have to make sure their needs are met by the things that AI might be outputting if you're using them. Okay, so that to me is the big takeaway. We still need that human element to make sure that what the AI is outputting will work in our scenario. And if it does work, then it's okay to use it. And if it doesn't work, well, then you have to write an objective manually that does match the needs of your stakeholders and your content. Okay, next we're going to take a look at some instructional strategies. Now, there are a ton of different instructional strategies out there, so I've kind of broken them down into categories. These are not hard-locked categories by any means, but just ways that I think of these different instructional strategies that fit nicely. Okay, so these are 3 buckets I've organized them in for today's lesson. Okay, we're going to talk about instructor-focused strategies. These focus on what the instructor is doing during the lesson. We're going to talk about action-focused strategies. These focuses on what the learners are doing during the lesson, right? What the actions that the learners are taking. And finally, we're going to talk about social-focused strategies. And in these strategies, learners are interacting with each other in some way. Okay, so we're going to talk about all 3 of these and I'll give you some different examples in each category. All right, let's talk about some different examples of instructor-focused strategies. These are instructional strategies where we're really focusing on the instructor and their job in the learning process. Okay, so first and foremost, we have direct instruction, right? The classic. In direct instruction, the instructor is going to tell learners information. They're going to tell them directly about the content. They're going to tell them how something works. We also have multimedia learning. And in multimedia learning, you're both going to show the learner something and tell them something. Okay, so in multimedia learning, you might have visuals as well as audio. This might be a PowerPoint presentation. This might be an instructional video like you're watching right now. Right, both great examples of multimedia learning. Another strategy, storytelling. Right, now the instructor is telling the learners information, but they're using narrative elements to help keep everyone engaged. Right, they're trying to tell a story while they tell you about the content, while they tell you about the information they're trying to pass along. Okay, another strategy, modeling. In modeling, the instructor is going to show the learners a process. You're going to show the learners how to do something, how to solve a problem, right? How to work through a scenario, right? In modeling, you show the learner how to do it as if you were in their shoes. Okay, so a very strong instructional strategy there. We also have coaching. And in coaching, you're going to observe the learners. You're going to observe them try a process, and you're going to advise them how to do it better. Okay, so coaching is all about observing and then giving advice after the fact, right? Observing and correcting. Finally, we have differentiated instruction. Okay, maybe you guys have heard of this, those of you that are teachers. This is definitely a big thing when I was teaching in Washoe, right? Well, differentiated instruction, the instructor's job is to adjust. Their job is to differentiate based on the needs of their students. So in differentiated instruction, the role of the instructor is to adjust their instruction based on the feedback they're getting, right? And that might be formative feedback, that might be summative. Okay, you might be looking at quiz results to adjust your instruction and change maybe the practice problems you're giving that day. Or you might just be observing your learners as you're teaching and looking for eye signals or looking for confused looks and trying to adjust your instruction based on that. Okay, so those are some different examples of instructor-focused instructional strategies. We're going to look more into these in our learning assignment, and I just wanted to kind of introduce these today. So those are the instructor-focused ones that we're going to talk about. And I just realized I did forget one more instructor-focused strategy, and that is microlearning. Okay, this is very popular in today's day and age. This will be very popular in the training and consulting world, right? Microlearning consists of instructing in very small increments, right? Hence the micro. The idea is that we want to break learning into as small chunks as possible, so that way our learners can digest them as easily as possible, right? So that is microlearning. One more instructor-focused strategy for you there. All right, next we're going to take a look at some examples of action-focused strategies. This is where the strategy focuses on the learner's role in the education process. Things like active learning. Okay, in active learning, the learner is a participant in the lesson. Okay, they're not a passive learner, like in some cases of direct instruction, right? Where the teacher is instructing, they're lecturing, and the learner might just be sitting there passively trying to soak in the information. Well, active learning is not that. Active learning is the learner is participating in the lesson in some way or shape. Okay, we have experiential learning. This is based on Kolb's learning cycle. Experiential learning is essentially where students experience something. Okay, they witness something happen, and then they reflect about it, and they talk about it. Okay, so experiential learning. You're experiencing something, and then we're reflecting on it. Next, inquiry-based learning. Okay, there are quite a few based learnings where essentially we're focusing our learning around a specific idea or topic. In the case of inquiry-based learning, we're trying to have students be curious. We want them to be curious about something. We want them to ask questions and investigate. And that's where the learning is going to come from, that curiosity, right? That's an example of inquiry-based learning. Next up, problem-based learning. Similar idea, where students are learning by solving a problem and going through that problem-solving process. We also have project-based learning. Once again, students are focused on performing the project. And by working on this project, maybe they're in a team, maybe the project has a few stages, right? They're going to learn more and more about the content. Another strategy, gamification. Gamification and game-based learning are quite popular these days. A lot of times they're used interchangeably, but they are not quite the same. In gamification, we are making our lessons game-like. So in gamification, the learners are still performing schoolwork like they normally would, but they're receiving game-like rewards. Maybe they're getting points. Maybe they're advancing on a reward board of some sort. Okay, maybe they get to roll for some reward at the end of class. Right? In gamification, we're still doing traditional schoolwork, but we're adding a game-like reward system. Okay, so that's something to be mindful of. Maybe you can implement that in your training. And then the other side of that, game-based learning, is where students are playing a game, right? We are learning by playing a game, by interacting with the game, and by learning how the game works. Hopefully, students are then learning about the content, right? So that is game-based learning there. So those are some action-focused strategies. Okay, lots of different strategies where we're really concerned with what the student is doing and what the learner's role is in the learning process. And finally, we'll wrap it up with some social focused strategies, right? these are instructional strategies that really focus on the learner dynamic in a group with peers, with a partner, right? That social interaction from learner to learner. We're really trying to harness that, and that's where a lot of the learning is going to take place. Okay, so some examples of social focus strategies. Maybe you've heard of think, pair, share is a very popular one, right? Which is essentially learners get a question or a concept, they think about it, and then they share their ideas with a partner. Okay, we have group discussions, very common strategy, right? Where we're sharing ideas with a group. In this course, we use online discussion boards, right? Very similar to a group discussion, but the parameters are a little bit different. So I thought it was worth its own category or own strategy line there. But in an online discussion boards, we're sharing ideas with our group electronically. Okay, so there's a little more maintenance in how we set that up, but it can be very effective, right? A way to let learners interact with one another and learn from each other. Okay, peer review, another example of social focus strategies, where peers are providing feedback to each other on their work. Right? Once again, we're learning through our peers. One learner is learning from another through that interaction. Okay, role playing. Students can interact with each other while in a specific role, taking on that identity of that role and kind of learning through those experiences. And then finally, I wanted to talk about a jigsaw. This is really popular in Washoe County, at least. But in a jigsaw, students learn one topic of many or a few topics. They present on their topic and they observe others present. Okay? So that's a bit of a mouthful. What are they doing? There are several topics, and each student or group takes one piece of the puzzle and they present on their piece. And the idea is that if each student presents on a different piece of the puzzle, then that puzzle will come together like a jigsaw. Okay, so jigsaws are very good when you have many topics or many ideas, and you don't necessarily need students to do a deep dive on each one. Okay, and I thought a jigsaw is actually a great way to look at these instructional strategies that we're talking about today. Okay, so let's see what that looks like for our knowledge check this week. So this week, we're going to try out a new instructional strategy for our discussion board. We're going to try a jigsaw activity. And like we said, in a jigsaw activity, your job is to become the master of kind of one specific piece of the puzzle and then report back to the group. Okay, so the way we're going to set it up this week is you are going to learn more about 3 different instructional strategies. You're going to choose those 3 strategies, one in each category that we talked about today. You're going to read or skim an article on that instructional strategy. You're going to share your findings with your peers, okay, on Friday the 26th. Okay, so typical fashion, we're going to have our initial post due on that Friday. And then we're going to look at everyone's posts, and I want you guys to try to find strategies that you think would work for your training. Okay, we've been talking a lot in this class about this hypothetical training scenario, right? We're going to keep pushing with that idea. We're going to basically keep building our training for that scenario at the end of the year. Okay, so right now you're thinking about which of these strategies is going to work in your training. You're going to read your peers' posts. You're going to select some strategies that you think would work for your training. And then in your reply, you're just going to write why they would work. Okay, so this is our jigsaw activity. We'll take a look at what it looks like online. But that is our slides for today. All right, here's our week 5 instruction page, which you've already found if you're watching this video. Okay, and you can see here how we have the 3 different categories: instructor focused strategies, action focused, and social focus. For your discussion, you're just going to choose one in each category and then complete the knowledge check 4 based on that. Okay, there's also a practice quiz if you want a few practice problems there. But like we said, in the knowledge check 4, we're skimming 3 articles. Okay, there's a few questions for you on the articles. I just want to know which strategies you chose, quick summary. I'd like to know some potential strengths and weaknesses that you see within the strategy. And I would like to know if you could see yourself implementing this strategy in a training scenario, why or why not. Okay? So we have 3 articles. You're going to answer those 3 questions for each article. Then you're going to check out 2 of your peers, at least 2 of your peers. You're going to respond to them. You're going to identify some instructional strategies that you think is going to work for your training scenario. And you're going to tell them why this would be a good fit. Okay? So that is our knowledge check number 4. We're summarizing some instructional strategies, doing that jigsaw activity, and then observing our peers and picking some scenarios or some strategies that we think would work for our scenario. Okay, so that's what we have this week. Remember, there's always office hours if you're ever stuck. That's all I have for you guys. Have a wonderful week.